My name is Darian. I'm a naturalist here at ACES, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our Naturalist Night tonight. Naturalist Nights is a 10-week free speaker series hosted by the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies, the Wilderness Workshop, and the Roaring Fork Autobahn. These talks are hosted each week through mid-March in Carbondale at 5:30 on Wednesdays and at ACES at 7 p.m. on Thursdays. Here are our Naturalist Nights sponsors. And a special shout out to tonight's featured sponsor, Harry Teague Architects. These businesses provide financial and in-kind donations, which cover expenses for our speakers and the cost of having Grassroots TV record our presentations. Grassroots TV airs these presentations on Channel 12 Up Valley and Channel 82 Down Valley. These presentations will also be available on our organization's websites in the coming weeks. Next week, we have Dr. Miranda Redmond from the Colorado State University presenting on a pinyon juniper woodland response to climate change. Now, I would like to hand it off to ACES CEO, Chris Lane, who will introduce tonight's presentation.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming tonight. Welcome to Naturalist Nights. As I think most of you know, the intention of Naturalist Nights is to educate the public on issues pertinent to our area, pertinent to Colorado. And we've heard from the community that tonight's presentation doesn't quite present all sides. And I know that Wilderness Workshop is working on a panel they're going to put together in the fall. Will, do you want to Will Roush with Wilderness Workshop make a comment about that?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. I'm Will Roush, Conservation Director at the Wilderness Workshop. And as Chris mentioned, wolves and wolf reintroduction is maybe not quite as uncontroversial as rocks or some of the other topics that we have at Naturalist Nights. And so we understand that, and we've also heard from folks in our community, especially some of the folks in the ranching community around Carbondale, that they'd appreciate different perspectives on this issue. So we're working with some of those folks to put together a panel and have probably 3 or 4 different speakers talking about wolves and wolf reintroduction with a variety of views, some having experienced ranching with wolves, perhaps some without. And we'll be putting that on in the late fall when folks who are working on ranches have a bit more time. So I'll just leave it at that and stay tuned.
Thank you, Will. And a couple of ground rules tonight. This is a presentation. It's not a forum. It's not a town hall meeting and a debate. So we are going to all have to agree to be respectful of each other, respectful of Mike Phillips' presentation. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. If you have a question, you may ask it. We're going to keep the questions short. And does everyone agree to those ground rules? Yes. Yes? All right. Good. Thank you. So with that, we'll introduce Mike Phillips, who got his master's in wildlife ecology from the University of Alaska. This guy's spent more time in Alaska, I'm so jealous, than probably anyone here. He got his bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois. He serves as the executive director of the Turner Endangered Species Fund and is the coordinator of the Turner Biodiversity Divisions, which he and Ted Turner founded in 1997. Prior to that, Mike worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He's worked for the National Park Service, and he has done groundbreaking work on wolves in the southeastern United States, the wolves, introducing them into Yellowstone. If you've ever seen them, they're just beautiful and amazing. And he is also an author of many papers, as well as a state senator. So with that, Mike Phillips, welcome, Senator Phillips.
How do we get the very first part of the rest of the program up? I'm going to let you do that, because I want to say something about a balanced presentation. If you cut me deep enough, I am a scientist, and I'm not interested in misleading you. I'm not interested in misleading myself. Some people took exception last night to data that I presented. I said to them, bring your own numbers. Of course, they didn't have any numbers. They would sometimes rather move forward on hearsay than facts. So this is a most balanced presentation that makes extensive use of data collected over many, many decades. Moreover, I would love a chance to debate anybody about wolf recovery and wolf reintroductions. I mean, mano a mano, a full-fledged debate. If y'all tee it up, I would be honored to debate the pro side. Let somebody else struggle to debate the opposing side. So anyway, it's an honor to be here. Thank you to ACES and Roaring Fork Audubon and the Wilderness Workshop. I've always considered time to be a great gift, and that you're spending your evening with me is certainly my honor. I'm here because a proper conversation about restoring gray wolves to the great public wildlands of western Colorado is due, if not long overdue. And you might say, well, gee whiz, Mike, why is that the case? Why is it due? Why is it maybe long overdue? There's some simple facts that set that whole notion up. One, there is durable, long-standing majority support for gray wolves in the state of Colorado. I can show you survey data going back to the early 1990s that say a majority of Coloradans would like gray wolves to be in the western part of the state. Those data have been collected continuously through 2014. The patterns haven't changed. So there's a lot of interest on the part of Coloradans in this particular issue. Also, there's a very favorable pattern of land ownership in western Colorado. 70% of the western half of the state is public land. And public lands are important because that's where gray wolves receive reasonable consideration, at least enough consideration so they can survive from Monday to Monday. Also, your state is blessed with a very favorable ungulate population. Ungulates are just hoofed mammals, deer and elk, for example. And your state clearly has more prey available for gray wolves than anywhere in the world. And why does that matter? We know from a host of studies, and again, when I make reference to what we know about gray wolves, be mindful, this is based on decades of good research. In areas where human-caused mortality is low, 85% of the variability in a wolf population is defined by food. So the abundance of deer and elk in western Colorado is certainly germane to this issue. And finally, there is a federal law that has application. Gray wolves in the state are fully endangered under the Endangered Species Act. All of those things make this topic timely. And then there's one last thing. And here's, I may tell you guys when I opine, otherwise I'm giving you facts. I'm going to opine for a moment. If I can get this to work. The reason that it's a timely conversation, it represents the archstone, the final piece, in an effort to restore the gray wolf from the high Arctic to the Mexican border. I don't necessarily need that microphone. Y'all can hear me, but there's no way in the world you can get gray wolves from here all the way to the Mexican border, a metapopulation of wolves, a population of populations. They'll never be complete unless you plug the middle. The Southern Rockies ecoregion is mostly western Colorado. There is no other place in the world where you can imagine the restoration of an imperiled large carnivore over such a continental landscape. That gives credence to this discussion. Also, we believe that it's very easy to make a compelling case that wolf restoration fits the contemporary sensibilities of Colorado. And I would offer this as evidence of that fit. It's a short video. If I can get the system to work, and tell me if it's not loud enough, I think I can control the volume. Can you hear anything? Okay, when y'all monkeyed with the system about an hour ago to tie it into your camera, you've lost sound through this system. So we need to fix that real quick so these folks can enjoy this. Only a 90-second video, but I promise you it's worth watching. And we're going to get out of that. Now you've really messed up the system. So hopefully this doesn't take long, because we don't have long. He even showed me how to run the board, so I knew how to turn it up, but it didn't work. It's always the AV gear, right? You know, last night we were at the Carbondale Middle School, and there was a young man named Mountain. Mountain must have been 12. He had it figured out, boy. I tell you what, there was not a problem all night long. Mountain had it going on. Here we go.
There's a chorus we sing here in this place, Colorado. It rings from the maroon bells to Mile High, from the great sand dunes to the highest town in America, in the birthplace of rodeo and the cheeseburger, where snow melt flows into every glass. We hear it floating on the breeze above red rocks or drifting way out into the backcountry where the wild things roam. And the air hums with life. It's our anthem to freedom. But listen carefully. One voice has gone missing. A note that rang through our mountains for eons has disappeared. Help us return this voice to Colorado.
I believe that conversation about gray wolves in Colorado is justified. But you could fairly then ask the question, why in the world would you spend your time listening to me, some guy from Montana? I caught my first gray wolf for research purposes in 1980. That's that picture. Not long after that, I had the high honor of running and leading the effort to restore red wolves to the southeastern United States. The work there involved the reintroduction of red wolves, the first attempt in the history of humankind to restore carnivore species that had been declared extinct in the wild. That little female, that's me with the hat on, that's 344, the first red wolf born in the wild in many decades. That candy-striped radio collar, that tape is just to make it more reflective at night. Not long after that, I had the high honor of leading the effort to restore gray wolves to Yellowstone National Park. I have been on every Mexican wolf recovery team that's been convened since 1995. I have worked on wolf recovery and research and conservation going on 40 years. I stand here today as a member of the science advisory team that's working with the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, and I'll say more about the project in a moment. And additionally, I have been a state legislator for 11 years. I'll hold my state Senate seat through the end of 2020. So I've had the good fortune to see this issue from a policy and legal perspective too. So at least I think I have some thoughts about wolf recovery that might matter to Coloradans. So we know, and y'all know this story, the gray wolf once was common across the United States. It was the most common large mammal there was. You could find them from coast to coast, east to west, and north to south. You could find them in the deserts and the swamps. You could find them in the grasslands and forests. But they were subjected to a many-century persecution program. We put forth great effort following the notion of manifest destiny to tame the landscape. And by the late 1950s, this most common large mammal had been extirpated from the United States, excepting a small population that lived in the Superior National Forest of northern Minnesota. A decade earlier, in the 1940s, Aldo Leopold pined for the restoration of the gray wolf to some of our country's great public wildlands. He made reference specifically to Yellowstone National Park, but he could have also said White River National Forest. And about 50 years later, we were able to achieve that vision with the reintroduction of gray wolves to Yellowstone National Park. We know that when Coloradans think thoughtfully about gray wolves, they'll often use Yellowstone as a touchstone for imagining the future of the western half of the state. So the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project developed another short film. It runs about 3 minutes that tells the Yellowstone story in a Colorado context. That is just an image of one of the wolves that we translocated from Canada to Yellowstone. And then this is that short video.
The time is now upon Coloradans to decide, do they want wolves to be part of their future?
And you're involved in the restoration of wolves to Yellowstone. Can you explain some of the parallels between a wolf recovery project in Yellowstone and what might happen in western Colorado?
We knew from the outset that if we gave them just a chance, they would take care of the rest. It's just such a rich history. I still think that this is probably from the beginning of the project the area that tells the richest story of restoration.
That might be. And the pen's still there.
Yeah, well, let's go.
It's great every time I come. I mean, the memories just come flooding back.
This was always an aim to get wolves to be released in Yellowstone to restore population to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Catching the animals in Canada, and the first batch that we got was 14 strong. The second batch we got was 17 strong. There was every satellite truck in the world there to document this historic event of the wolves coming into the park.
Literally, some people felt the world as we know it is going to come to an end if you turn these things loose. We brought the shipping crates up here, and we waited.
Right.
And finally, we got the word from you. We've gotten approval to let them out of the crates.
Yeah.
Remember we came out and we tracked them?
That's right. Strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack.
Yes.
It worked.
Yeah, this is history. This was a model. So this idea could be exported out to other places. We got a couple tracks here. When we first started here, you didn't have this.
There were no wolf tracks.
The iconic status of Yellowstone 20 years ago, when we got here, was not like it is now.
When I recall, there was no beaver pond in here. How long has this been here?
The first survey I did, that was 1996, and the entire northern range, I got one beaver colony. Now I did the survey last fall, 14, 15. This is brand new. All this willow growth has been in the last 20 years. So this site has transformed itself. Well, wolves impacted elk, so that change in elk, that came through the vegetation community. So not all these stems were browsed down. So not only have beavers increased 14-fold since wolf recovery, songbirds, all on the rise. They were not here 20 years ago. Yellowstone has gotten a breath of fresh air since wolves, the other carnivores too, have come back.
And it really boils down to a simple question to Coloradans. Do you want wolves to be part of the future?
I think it's just absolutely true that Yellowstone came about because the country made a choice. There's another place where the choice can be made, and that place, of course, is the great public wildlands of western Colorado. A few years ago, a small group of people, including some in this room, came together and gave rise to the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project as a coalition dedicated to using education to advance the restoration of the gray wolves to western Colorado. The project is based on the simple premise that if Coloradans would just embrace a realistic view of the gray wolf, they would conclude that coexisting with the species is a rather straightforward affair. If that's a reasonable premise, if that's a justifiable belief, then you can fairly ask the question, why does wolf restoration struggle so? And I've thought about that a lot over many decades, and I've concluded that the struggle all relates to the mythical wolf. The project is well aware of the mythical wolf, and it's aiming to set that notion aside, as I said, through good education. But the myth is absolutely powerful. It is very hard to see the real wolf through the foggy haze of confusion created by the myth. The myth would have you believe that gray wolves are a threat to human safety, they're a threat to the big game industry, they're a threat to the livestock industry. That's what the myth would have you believe. The myth would have you believe that a gray wolf has almost a supernatural ability to exercise its predatory will on a whim, and by doing so, create a wake of waste and death and desolation. That's what the myth would have you believe, but the real wolf is not even a shadow of the mythical wolf, but unfortunately, the myth is as wrong as it is strong. The real wolf is different. For the real wolf, life is a nearly constant struggle to survive. Typically, wolves go several days between meals. Feast or famine is their modus operandi. Starvation is a common cause of death. Puppies suffer most. Hunting by gray wolves is overwhelmingly characterized by failure. Decades of work with gray wolves show that 85% of their attempts to hunt fail to put any food in their belly. Why would they be so plagued by failure? Well, it's because of the way they're built. They're not built well for the job that they have chosen for themselves. If you look at that animal, they are always smaller, nearly always smaller than their prey. In the northern Rocky Mountains, a gray wolf might weigh on average 90 pounds. For heaven's sakes, deer weigh more than 90 pounds. So they're smaller than their prey. That doesn't help. Their face is too long. That long nose, what it does? What it does is it minimizes the power of the canines when they shut that mouth. You lose some leverage. Look at that cougar. See his short nose? Boy, that short nose means he's got a lot of biting power right at the tips of his canines. The gray wolf's jaw doesn't lock. A hyena's jaw will lock, helping hold it shut like a vice of sorts. The gray wolf's jaw doesn't lock shut. Their legs don't supinate. Their legs are good for traveling, and that's about it. They can't turn and grab you. Look at that cougar again. They've got muscular forelimbs for a reason. They grab things with those front feet. Black bears and grizzly bears do the same thing. A gray wolf can't grab anything with his feet. His feet and his front legs are this side of useless when it comes to killing something. Their teeth wear down and break. They're not built well for the job that they have chosen for themselves. They're so poorly suited to their lifestyle that the best time to be a gray wolf? The best time to be a gray wolf is the depth of winter when everything else is struggling. That's the sweet spot for the gray wolf. Not a nice spring day or a nice fall day. That's a sweet spot for an elk. That's not a good time to be a gray wolf. Life is so hard for the gray wolf, it is noticeably short. In the northern Rocky Mountains, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old gray wolf is an old gray wolf. So you can fairly ask, what is it that they have that they use to their advantage? There's two things they possess that give them enough to survive and flourish. The first thing is they are doggedly determined. They just keep coming day after day. They refuse to give up. And they are supremely social. They find strength in numbers. There's that Rudyard Kipling poem, The Law of the Jungle, the one line that says the strength of the wolf is the pack and the strength of the pack is the wolf. I made reference to that in the film as well. It is their supreme sociality and their dogged determination that allows them to flourish. Otherwise, oh boy, they struggle. Now, I know as well as anybody that the whole notion of wolf recovery is very difficult. It's an inciting issue. Some people harbor a deep-seated hatred for the species and for the people and the processes that try to advance its recovery. But I also know that much of the fear and frustration and anxiety is based on misinformation. As an educational effort, the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project aims to correct that. I stand tonight in front of you as a member of the project science team. It is a growing coalition that really aims to use education to advance restoration. In addition to that, the project has a simple aim. The aim is to restore Colorado's natural balance. Well, that begs the question, what is meant by balance? Well, on the one hand, balance is a euphemism for the original predator-prey interactions that have defined species like wolves and elk for time immemorial. There is a wisdom to that relationship. We know from very good studies that when gray wolves are common enough for a long enough period of time, their predatory activities can change a place, can make a place more biologically rich, with greater integrity. That's often referred to as a trophic cascade. We can speak about that later, but that's part of what is meant by balance. Before the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, the term really refers to more than ecological integrity. It refers to, at a very basic level, balance means supporting and celebrating the original arrangement of nature, the original lineup. Wolves were here, they're not now, and so that original arrangement has been upset. And the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project aims to try to restore that balanced arrangement. We believe that there is wisdom in the original arrangement of nature. We believe that there is value in the tension between life and death. sort of the yin and yang of nature, if you will. And while understanding this wisdom is difficult at times, I get that. It is wrong-headed to deny it. It is nature's way to celebrate this tension. It's also wrong-headed to deny the importance of any species to this arrangement. You know, the father of wildlife management, Aldo Leopold, was the one who first, he opined, and if I get it right, to keep every cog and wheel is the first order of intelligent tinkering. So for the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, balance is all about keeping cogs and wheels by reestablishing the gray wolf in western Colorado. Well, gee whiz, as a sentiment, that's fine as far as it goes. But there would be consequences for bringing the gray wolf back to Colorado, and I would like to take each one of those consequences in turn. The first considers wolves and human safety, the second wolves and big game, and the third the second wolves and livestock, and the third wolves and big game. And then I would like to take head on this red herring argument that gray wolves are going to settle Colorado naturally. But first, let's look at wolves and human safety. They are not what you would think they are. I wish I could offer data point after data point that speak about wolves and human safety, but the fact is those data do not exist because they do not represent an acknowledgeable threat to human safety. I realize this is a very hard thing for many people to accept, and I can imagine that it's difficult to accept because they are large carnivores. They are dog-like in some superficial respects, and I suppose most of us have had one or several nerve-rattling encounters with a domestic dog. And they are sometimes some scary-looking dudes. That's a pretty scary-looking wolf. But more often than not, they're like this old lady from Montana. She's not scary-looking, and I promise you, she doesn't want anything to do with you. None of them do. Wolves represent an infinitesimal threat to human safety. Here are some numbers that you can look at. I apologize for the text slide, but we'll go through quickly. Alaska took a hard look at this over a century. They found no evidence of humans being killed by wolves. Gray wolves have always been common in Minnesota and Lake Superior National Forest. When you look at Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, lots of people, certainly more than Colorado, lots of wolves, no negative interactions to speak of, none coming out of the Superior National Forest, which has always been a stronghold for the species. You can extend that pattern even further. Field national parks and wilderness areas across the U.S. and in Canada, no incidents. And then to drive it to Yellowstone National Park, just from 1995 to 2015, a 20-year period of time, well over 2.5 million tent camper nights sleeping out in Yellowstone, a time that gray wolves averaged 115 wolves in 11 packs, and absolutely no encounters that were in any way negative. Nearly all wolves are shy and avoid humans. That's just the way they're wired. They're not a black bear. They're not a cougar. They're not a coyote. They're hardwired to avoid people. Okay, now, on to wolves and livestock. It is a certainty that if gray wolves are established in the public wildlands of western Colorado, some will kill livestock. Guarantee it. But it's equally certain that the depredations will be uncommon. It is the atypical wolf that kills livestock. The actual magnitude of wolf-livestock interactions pales in comparison to what we expect. We expect the worst. Gray wolves never deliver the worst. So let's take a look for 2 decades worth of work in the northern Rocky Mountains. Colorado doesn't have to blaze this trail all by itself. We've been doing this for a long time elsewhere. To understand the data that I'm going to share, that's the wolf distribution in the northern Rocky Mountains. Every circle represents a known pack. You can see Montana, you can see Wyoming, you can see Idaho. Hundreds of packs of gray wolves. That's a total of about 1,700 gray wolves hard on the ground. So lots of gray wolves running around the northern Rocky Mountains. And here's the kind of data that you see about wolf-livestock interactions. From 1997 to 2015, that area supported about 6 million cattle. Of those 6 million, about 117 had been killed by wolves. These are annual averages. So on average, over that period of time, 18 years, gray wolves killed 117 cattle out of a population of 6 million. That represents 0.002%. In other words, 99.998% of the cattle, nothing to do with gray wolves. Same pattern with sheep, a lot of sheep, 1 million sheep in the 3 states. On average, 235 sheep are killed by gray wolves in the 3 states. You can see the range of data, a low of 12, a high of 721 in 2019. So there's some variability about that average. But it amounts to, that average amounts to 0.02%. So in other words, 99.98% of the sheep never had any encounter with gray wolves. And finally, if you ask, well, what kind of gray wolf population? Well, over 1,000. There's the range and the years. Wolves that were killed because of these depredations, on average 127 gray wolves killed, which is 11% of their population. So I picked an average year to make another point. I just chose 2010. I could have chosen 2015. I could have chosen 2012. I chose 2010. In 2010, the cattle ranchers in the 3 states now reported loss of 198,000 cattle due to non-predator causes. Almost 199,000 cattle. That year, on average, gray wolves would have killed 117. That only represents 0.06% of the cattle that died. So 99.94% of the cattle that died were not killed by gray wolves. They were killed by other things. So maybe you say, well, gee whiz, Mike, you're denying some important patterns by looking at this 3-state region. What would it be if you drilled down more deeply in your home state like Montana? So let's take a quick look at Montana and its livestock population. There's where the gray wolves can be found in Montana today. It's about the western quarter of the state. The state, east to west, about 2 million cattle, 450,000 sheep, and about 500 gray wolves. So that's the universe of opportunity that we're going to talk about. And here's the kinds of data that you see. Bear with this histogram. It's not as bad as it looks. We're going to start with cattle. Cattle is the blue. So just pay attention to the blue bars. And I'm going to walk year through year, and I'll describe what the bar is beneath. And to be clear, the y-axis is just number of animals, and the x-axis is time. So cattle, we start out here, less than 25 cows killed by gray wolves, less than 25, less than 50, less than 50, less than 75, less than 100, less than 100, less than 75, less than 75, less than 50, less than 50. Let's do the same thing with sheep. Sheep's the red bar. Sheep less than 25, less than 50, less than 50, less than 100, less than 50, less than 125. We've got a big year in 2009, which is something of an aberration. We come down here less than 75, less than 50, less than 25. Now let's take a look at gray wolves killed because of depredations. These were killed by federal agents trying to resolve conflicts with livestock. That's the yellow bar. So gray wolves killed less than 25, less than 25, less than 50, less than 75, less than 125, less than 150, 150, 125, 75, and on down to slightly greater than 50. Here's what those data look like in aggregate. But first, when I show you those, I want to make a point about management and how hard their gray wolves are hit in Montana. We just looked at these data, ignore those data. And again, this is just type of kill, how the wolf was killed. And the y-axis is, again, numbers of animals. Let's look at legal harvest. Whoops, I'm sorry. We're going to look just at legal harvest because these animals get tacked onto these guys. So in 2009, going to 2016, you had either being hunted or trapped, gray wolves in Montana, more than 50, more than 100, more than 150, more than 200. When you add all these up, the legal harvest and the agency control, about 250 gray wolves are being killed in Montana every year. So here's what all of those data look like in aggregate. These are average numbers for Montana. In wolf country, about 500,000 head of cattle. And on average, 50 are killed by wolves. 165,000 sheep in wolf country, 65 killed by wolves, about 500 wolves in wolf country, 250 killed either by control or recreation. That is not a threat to the livestock industry. It is a problem for the individual producer who's suffering losses, and we've got to fix that problem. But this is not a threat to the industry. If you imagine Colorado, your state has about 2.85 million cattle, about 400,000 sheep. Just west of I-25, if you go east of I-25, it's a waste of time. That's not large carnivore country. In contrast, west of I-25, that's pretty good. So we said, well, what kind of cattle population west of I-25? About 500,000 cattle, about 175,000 head of sheep. If it was twice the problem, in Colorado that it's been in Montana, then you're going to have 100 cattle killed by gray wolves out of 500,000. That's 0.02%. If it's twice the problem, that means 99.98% of the cattle don't have a problem. Y'all can see the sheep data. The point is it's not going to disrupt your industry. For heaven's sakes, most of your cattle can be found east of I-25. It doesn't mean that we ignore the depredations that occur. It just means that they are so infrequent, they involve so few animals, it's not a threat to the industry. But to be fair, you got to look at more than just the number of animals that you know that have been killed. There are undetected kills. Field work is the art of estimating. They kill one cow, they may kill a second one that you never find out about. So you have to adjust any compensation upward a little bit for undetected kills. And there's also some good data that show in certain circumstances, especially for a ranch where a depredation has occurred, the animals that remain in the herd don't gain weight the way they're supposed to. On average, the calves gain 22 pounds less. A good study from 18 ranches in Montana. So to be fair, you would also adjust any compensation payment upward to account for weight not gained. It has always been a challenge for ranchers to ensure that enough animals survive and gain enough weight to make sending them to slaughter profitable. That's always been a challenge. For most ranchers, gray wolves are not going to add to that challenge in the least. That's not unbalanced, that's not misleading, those are the numbers. And when I do change the numbers, I always inflate upward so as to not mislead you with depressed numbers. So now let's think about wolves and big game. There is this crazy notion coming from some groups that, oh my gosh, gray wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains have destroyed big game hunting. So real quick, here are some numbers, because numbers matter. These are data collected by the state game agencies. The first column is the estimate of the number of elk in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Colorado, the animals that are harvested out of that estimated population. You can see Colorado has an elk population unlike anywhere else. Idaho doesn't report a population estimate. They do give harvest numbers. And so you can see a lot of elk being killed, the same with deer. And these data represent many year averages. So just for Colorado, you guys need to make note. After the Colorado hunter, when you add the two numbers of harvest for elk, 48.5 and 36.5, you're pushing out at almost 80,000. After recreational hunters have killed 80,000 deer and elk, on average, you guys have left about 750,000 elk and deer. But still, this notion persists that, oh my gosh, big game hunting is coming to a screeching halt in Montana because of the gray wolves. Well, here's the truth, and I sit on for years I served as the ranking minority member in the House Fish and Game Committee. I'm now the ranking minority on the Senate Fish and Game Committee. So I see these data as a sitting senator up close and personal. I get to work with the state game department. I am a trained biologist myself. Here are the data. It looks like a confusing map, but it's really not too bad. The areas that appear in cream colored, those are elk management units that are below, they're below objective. Below objective. Green is where the state wants the area to be in terms of how many elk. And then finally, the red is over objective. So hold that notion. And then that blue line, I put a blue line here. Everything on this side of the blue line, on the western half, that's wolf country. Everything on the eastern side of Montana, there are no wolves out there, so we're not going to pay much attention to all this country. But when you look at this pattern, there's only a few areas in wolf country where the state has concluded that there aren't enough elk. Mostly you have game management units that are within the target zone or they're above objective. And you have all kinds of areas of hunt elk in the eastern part of the state where you've got many, many elk management units that are over objective. Do you guys know on this Sunday, February 15th, I'm going elk hunting? I'm going elk hunting because in the state of Montana, we've got so doggone many elk now that the state has instituted 44 shoulder season hunts. 44 areas where you can hunt before the regular 5-week season or well after the end of the 5-week season. When was the last time a Colorado hunter hunted elk in February? I'm going elk hunting on Sunday. Right up here. It's crazy to think that gray wolves have disrupted big game hunting. That's just a ridiculous claim. You want to think about gray wolves, they're pretty simple. Here's the math for a gray wolf. Every morning she wakes up and she's got to go to work. And for a gray wolf, work is putting 7 to 10 pounds of food in her belly every day. Now, there are many days she's going to go hungry, but on average, she's got to put 7 to 10 pounds of food in her belly to maintain good health. So let's say 10 pounds a day. That's 70 pounds of food a week. Now, let's say that's 280 pounds a month. Let's round up to 300. 300 pounds of food in her belly every month. That's about what she would get from the equivalent of one adult cow elk. We'll say one cow elk a month. So that's 12 a year. Let's round up to 15. Say she needs the equivalent of 15 adult cow elk a year. And if she's represented by 499 of her brethren, total population of 500, that means gray wolves that are 500 strong would kill about 7,750 adult cow elk, or the equivalent. So let's just say, heck with it, 10,000. Well, it's easy to remember 10,000. 500 gray wolves are going to take the equivalent of about 10,000 adult cow elk every year. After your hunters have already had their shot at the elk, you guys have left, according to your own state survey data, 275,000 elk, saying nothing about your nearly 500,000 deer. How in the world are 500 gray wolves taking 10,000 adult cow elk going to put a dent in that population? Gray wolves will not diminish the opportunity to hunt big game in the state of Colorado. The numbers just don't add up. So now I want to address head on this red herring argument. Oh, gee whiz, you don't need to do anything. They're coming. In fact, they're already here. That's a ridiculous claim, an absolutely ridiculous claim. I know of 5 well-documented cases of wolves wandering into the state. 1 was shot, 1 was poisoned, 1 was hit by a car, and I know of 2 that just disappeared. So they do come down. There's an old Russian proverb that says a wolf is kept fed by its feet. They have this tremendous capacity to wander over great distances. Well, I'm not surprised a wolf comes into the state on a great big walkabout, but here's why I know they are not here in anything that would begin to resemble even a small population. First and foremost, they do not like being alone. I told you they're supremely social. They are so very social that you know where a lone wolf travels in wolf country? A lone wolf travels between the wolf pack territories, because otherwise he might bump into a problem because the pack may not treat him very well. They know about one another. And when they're on their own, they look. They look for each other. They smell for each other. They howl for each other. They do not like being alone. That is not a good thing if you're a gray wolf. As I said, supremely social. And when they show up, they are obvious. They have skillets for feet. They have big feet. Their feet are as big as my hand. I don't have especially large hands, but that's a big foot on a 90-pound canid. They howl at the moon, they poop on the road, they run around in groups. They're obvious. They evolved as the big dog on the block. There's nothing subtle about a gray wolf. So when they get in an area, there's no doubt they're there. And when they get into good habitat, they become more common. Now, don't worry about the busyness of this slide. It's pretty simple, really. We're going to look at this blue arrow. That's the northwestern Montana population. The yellow and red speak to Yellowstone and Idaho, but we reintroduced wolves, and forget that for a moment. This is the beginnings of a naturally occurring population in northwestern Montana. In 1990, it was about 5 wolves strong. That's that arrow. 10 years later, it was 100 strong. 5 to 100 in a short 10 years, and during that entire time, everybody knew they were there, and they were being intensively studied. The pattern is the same from Oregon. 14 wolves in 2009 were known in the state, and by 2015 they were 100 strong. Similarly, Washington, 5 wolves in 2009, 115 wolves in 2016. It does not take them long to take advantage of a toehold. So if that's not enough, here's why as well you're not going to see natural recolonization. These are some fantastic maps. They look hard at first, but they're really quite simple. This is just a map of habitat quality for gray wolves. The red indicates low quality habitat. The green is high quality habitat. You can see in the northern Rocky Mountains, all those wolf packs are largely living in areas that are shaded kind of green. They're certainly not reddish. So this is all anything from about here down on the map. It's okay, they make a go of it. You can see that Colorado's got a lot of habitat, according to this map, that's very much like western Montana and Idaho. So you got good habitat, and you look here in Wyoming, that's not bad. That's not bad. They might be able to scoot across. Not great habitat, but not necessarily bad. And here's what we know has happened. We then applied those data to an electrical current flow model. We're just saying if gray wolves behave like electricity, here's where the current, the wolves would flow. And we looked at specific animals, one wolf that dispersed out of Idaho into northern California, and as you would expect, it followed the area of high current flow, the green, pretty well, and then two animals that came out of Wyoming, they followed what the model predicted. So you say, well, gee whiz, Mike, that's not bad, that's not bad. There seems to be a lot of potential for current flow or wolf movement across the southwestern part of Colorado. Here's what happened. When Wyoming was able to secure the removal of the gray wolf from the federal list of threatened and endangered species, they now control them with state laws and regulations. They said, we're going to consider the gray wolf across 88% of the state. All of Wyoming that's crosshatched is now considered an area where gray wolves are listed as a predatory species. In state law, a predatory species means there is no management. It means that in all of that country of Wyoming, a gray wolf can be shot any time, day or night, any time of the year, in any numbers, and left in the field. So there's this real now very socially intolerant habitat that gray wolves have to wander through because of Wyoming calling them a predatory species. So here's what that does to the habitat map. Now nearly all of Wyoming is lousy habitat, and here's what that designation does to our current flow model. There's just not a lot of potential for gray wolves to get through that country because they're going to get shot and left in the field. They don't even have to shoot, shovel, and shut up. Hell, it's legal. And Utah would prefer to go the same route. There's still some connectivity here, but they would love to go the route of Wyoming. And up in here, Idaho, we didn't put a social filter on this particular version of the map, but Idaho is managing gray wolves very aggressively too. The potential for gray wolves to wander from the north to the south into Colorado is very, very slight. But here's something y'all need to make an important note of. I think you're being misled by any one of your elected officials that say, oh, gee whiz, I'm okay with gray wolves if they come in on their own. I just don't think they should be reintroduced. Well, so long as the gray wolf is listed as fully endangered under the Endangered Species Act in Colorado, which it is, if they come in on their own, you have no management latitude at all because they're fully endangered. And there's virtually nothing you can do to an endangered animal without violating federal law. If you really are okay with the notion of gray wolves, but you think they should be allowed to come in on their own rather than reintroduced, what you should really say is, I'm okay with gray wolves, and the best deal I can get from my neighbors is to reintroduce them on purpose because the federal law would then allow you to build out a management scheme that was very accommodating to the needs and concerns of local citizens. I promise you guys, it's a great deal easier for Coloradans to coexist with a reintroduced gray wolf rather than a fully endangered gray wolf. And next time CPW says, oh, you don't need to worry about it, they're coming on their own, you can say, wait a minute, that's not a good deal. We have no management latitude at all. So don't buy into this notion of the red herring argument about natural recolonization. I think Americans are blessed that the great public wildlands of western Colorado are still highly suitable for the gray wolf. That makes the job of restoration really quite simple. We just need to put them back. But you could fairly ask from the title of my slide, or the title slide for this talk, how would that actually stand as an archstone for nature, other than connecting gray wolves from the high Arctic to the Mexican border? How does it stand as an archstone for nature? I think, and now I'm opining, this is my opinion, I think that such a project would be an acknowledgement of the wisdom in the original arrangement of nature. I think we could conclude that prey matter, predators matter, life matters, death matters, the original arrangement of nature matters. I think that's what wolf restoration in Colorado would represent. It would remind us, I think vividly remind us, that our past does not have to be our future. And I think, finally, it would illustrate that if we could accommodate wolves in Colorado, it would stand as another collective effort that would prompt people to work on making the world a better place for all life, even species that have no constituency. And it is a certainty that the increasing humanization and subsequent degradation of the planet makes clear that too often we operate as misguided gods. And I think wolf restoration gives us a chance to recognize that we hold in our hand the power to operate otherwise. It seems to me that there will be no archstones for nature if they're not built by our hands. Thank you for listening. I would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mike, very much. Okay, for Q&A, we're going to do about less than 20 minutes. And if you do need to leave, feel free to leave. You're not going to insult anybody. This is being recorded, so you're going to need to step up to the mic right there. I'm going to call on you. And please keep your question under 45 seconds. This is not the chance to say your life story. This is a question and answer session. So thank you very much. You raised your hand first right here, so please step up to the mic.
Oh, I see. That's why you won, because you're recording. I understand. I did not mean to mess up the system.
If you're
Yes,
going,
sir.
If you're going from 5 wolves to 100, is there a problem with inbreeding?
If you translocated gray wolves to Colorado, that you'd have to do that and then reintroduce them. You could specifically capture and move gray wolves from disparate areas in the northern Rocky Mountains. You could get 3 or 4 from Idaho and 3 or 4 from Montana and 3 or 4 from Wyoming. And by doing so, you would capture a great deal of the genetic variability that's in that population. So you could, with a very simple strategy, avoid any sort of genetic problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, but we can work around that. That's an easy one. Yeah, I can repeat 2 questions, Chris, if you don't want people to have to walk. It's up to y'all, but... Yes, sir, go ahead. Right here. Yeah.
Will they eat deer?
Oh, you betcha they will eat deer, although I have to believe that the best prey item for a gray wolf is elk. The question was, do they eat deer? They certainly do. They certainly do, but elk is a nice big package, and at the end of the day, where elk and deer both occur, gray wolves seem to prefer, that's a strong word ecologically, but they certainly make extensive more use of elk. So I would have you believe in Colorado the food habits would be mostly defined by elk, but deer would be an important component too. That's why when you think about ungulate biomass, ungulates, again, hoof mammals, deer and elk, it's that total number that really matters. And after your hunters have had their way with deer and elk, you still have over 700,000. It's a prey population unheard of for gray wolves anywhere in the world when you account for density. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have a question for you. If your facts and figures are valid, why do you think that Idaho and Wyoming are having such an aggressive management, i.e. killing, of the wolves?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of residents in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho that would have you believe we have too many gray wolves. There are many residents that don't want any gray wolves. And they say, well, the federal government is insisting that we only have about 100 each. So Wyoming can say, well, if we have to have 100, let's shoot for about 150, and anything over that we don't need and we don't want. And it's their right to make that claim. And so they manage aggressively. In Montana, it's the same belief for the most part. The people that testify to our committees and spend most of their time working with Fish and Game want fewer gray wolves. And so you can kill a lot and try to achieve your desire. Now, as it turns out for gray wolves, they're very fecund. A gray wolf population can withstand a lot of persecution pressure and still persist. There is some concern about social upheaval and how by removing adults you're creating social upheaval and these inexperienced gray wolves wander off and may kill more cattle than they would otherwise. That's a more nuanced aspect of liberal killing of gray wolves. But the states don't want any more gray wolves. They would prefer to have fewer. Please know that the recreational killing programs and the control actions do not aim to maintain a population level. There's a specific aim to reduce numbers. Montana would want fewer gray wolves. At least the Montanans that show up and insist on a certain approach. And you know the world is run by those who show up. Yes, sir, right there.
We've had some domestic pets, dogs killed by coyotes. The one incident I can remember is off of a leash on Smuggler Mountain here behind. What would the interaction
Yeah, well, they're certainly not nearly as tolerant of people as coyotes, so there would be less opportunity for a gray wolf to kill a pet on a leash. That must have been a crazy event. Wow. Wow. But anyway, gray wolves will kill dogs, but not in big numbers, because for the most part, they're way out there, and the dogs aren't. They're not coyotes. They're not tolerant of people for the most part, but you'll see some isolated cases of somebody's dog hiking in a big patch of wilderness or Forest Service ground is killed by a gray wolf. But, you know, grizzly bears, black bears, lots of things challenge us in the woods. But it won't be a big deal. But they'll kill dogs. Yes, sir. And
what kind of pushback are you getting from the Colorado Department of Wildlife? So I could see that.
yeah. Sure. Please know, Colorado Parks and Wildlife is populated by some very talented biologists that have big hearts, and their hearts are in the right place. It's a great agency. All should be proud. They ushered into existence many years ago a very good state wolf management plan. And they and that group that was assembled of various sensibilities put together a good plan. It was premised on the notion of natural recolonization, and the skeptic in me, the pessimist, would say some people supported that plan because they never thought they'd have to deal with the consequences. But CPW would say today, you know, about 3 years ago, Governor Hickenlooper and the governors of Arizona and Utah and New Mexico took a cheap shot at me for some ridiculous claims about the Mexican wolf recovery program. So I pushed back in the Salt Lake City Tribune to see where I could get the state of Colorado to go. And they said clearly, oh, we're okay with gray wolves. They were a part of our past. They can be a part of our future. We've got a good plan. That's all true. They emphasize natural recolonization. And I think that they recognize, again, the skeptic in me says, oh, if they say that, they can appear reasonable and never have to suffer the consequences. What they don't tell you is that a naturally occurring, fully endangered gray wolf is a problem because you have no management latitude whatsoever. If they were really being forthcoming, they would say, well, you know, they probably won't get here. We've got good data that would suggest that. And if they do, boy, we've got a problem. You know, the only thing you can do to manage a gray wolf that's fully endangered is to kill it in defense of human life or to harass it in defense of human life. Otherwise, your hands are tied. You know, in the Northern Rocky Mountains, you know what pushed the reintroductions over the top in the Northern Rocky Mountains? When the die was cast and it was apparent, oh my gosh, there's gray wolves in northwestern Montana, they're going to move into Idaho, they're going to move in the greater Yellowstone, we got to get the best deal for our constituents possible. That's what prompted the congressional delegation to say the best deal is through reintroductions where we have some ability to build out management schemes that make sense for our people. That's what CPW says. They're telling you half the story, and I think that's a disservice. Yes, way in the back.
Yeah, you know your graph that showed 2010?
Yes, sir.
Why on the U.S. Department of Agriculture website is there like a 4,000 number discrepancy between yours and theirs?
Some of the data are reported in very different ways. After this, you can show me that website, and I will get back to you and I'll explain the discrepancy. Right off the top of my head, I don't know. I do know this 2010 was a good year to illustrate lots of cattle die, not so many by. So you're saying they would show 4,000 cattle killed by gray wolves? 4,437. Yeah, you know, there's no way. I've got another slide that I can show you the verified complaints and the total number of complaints received. Well, we'll get there real quick. Bear with me, guys. This won't take but a minute. I appreciate the question. No, I'm saying their data may not be all that reliable. Hang on. We're getting there. Bear with me. These are important data. There. So the first bar that goes highest is the number of complaints received, and the second bar is the number of complaints that were verified. So on average, about twice as many complaints are registered that are verified as gray wolves. I would guess that they're using the number of data coming off of these complaints received rather than complaints verified. But we can follow up and make sure that we clarify that point. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, Wayne, yes.
Yeah, what other policy changes do you think need to happen in other sectors to ease the reintroduction of gray wolves? Like I know the agriculture sector is having a really big hit right now. They're already in debt. There's a lot of suicides, and for them, they see that as a big problem as reintroducing wolves. But when the real problem I feel is the agriculture sector needs a lot of policy changes before we can focus on conservation.
Well, there are lots of challenges to the livestock industry, and in this country they feed us, and so they're important. I didn't bring a raft of good ideas about what can be done, but the industrial complex that is agribusiness doesn't serve the small family rancher very well at all. Y'all know most of the beef raised in this country is grown east of the Mississippi River. I believe that the biggest beef producing state in the Union is Florida. I think small family ranches are important. They provide a host of benefits, and we should rise up in their defense. One thing that we already do is provide access to public grass at a fraction of what it's worth. That's an important program. The Taylor Grazing Act put that into place decades ago. We should celebrate that. Ranchers help preserve open space and wildlife habitat. They give vitality and vigor to local communities. We're not getting that out of the big agribusiness necessarily. Anyway, it's a wonderful question, but I really didn't spend much time. Yes, sir, over here.
Could I follow up on that question? Because last night I asked you about cows and wolves interacting in the greater Yellowstone system, and we agreed that 750,000 acres of livestock permits have been withdrawn backwards because, and that to me is an acknowledgement that wolves and cattle don't coexist well on public grazing lots.
Yeah.
You said, well, we'll just cancel you there and buy a permit somewhere else.
No. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I can be clear. The National Wildlife Federation has run for many years an allotment buyout program. And these are allotments that suffer from chronic depredations by grizzly bears and gray wolves. And so NWF is saying to the rancher, we might have a solution. If we get you off that allotment and put you somewhere else, we can make you whole and you still ranch. And some ranchers have chosen in the free market system to take that opportunity. It is not a silver bullet for resolving wolf livestock conflicts, because you simply would never be able to affect a program as big enough, nor would you want to. They're specifically targeting high conflict areas that also include grizzly bears. But it's a valid point, and hundreds of thousands of acres of federal allotments have been retired through this program, trying to say to a rancher, do you want to keep banging your head against the wall? Here's another way if you want to take it. And it's all done willingly. Nobody's...
Well, I don't know where we would go.
Yeah, fair enough. And I don't know that NWF, anybody would come here, but it's a wonderful point. You know the landscape better than me, and if your gut says, I got nowhere to go, then a buyout program may not serve you well. There's other things that we can do to reduce conflicts with wolves and livestock. Range riders make a big difference.
We do already.
Yeah, good. There you go. That would help mightily. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Mark Zachary, Aspen resident. At the beginning, you offered to debate anyone.
Yeah, you bet.
I'll take you up on
That's
it.
great.
As long as I get the anti-wolf introduction side of the debate.
Oh, sure. You bet, Mark, anytime.
We can do it right now.
Yeah, we might need it to make sure we get a good audience.
Well, we got a good audience.
Well, I mean that.
Say it later.
Yeah, and a bigger room.
I'm not voting.
Bigger room. That'd be great. Thank you. Yes, sir, in the back. Go. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Oh, sure, because nature's that way. Oh, the question was, do predators self-regulate? Sure, because nature does that. I mean, if you have a litter of puppies and you can't feed them, the puppies die. And when food gets tight for a gray wolf, it's the puppies that suffer most. I mean, they die first. The adults they're not very generous. They eat first. So in that regard, they are self-regulating.
Well, I'm thinking more of the fact that the pack is going to move, or another pack is going to appear.
Well, sure, and for gray wolves, a common source of mortality is intraspecific aggression, wolves killing wolves. And so there's a lot of dynamic going on between wolf packs. And sometimes that can change the landscape, and sometimes it can affect population size. They're really, really good with one another in their family. They're really, really violent with one another outside their pack. Yeah, kind of a lot like us in many ways, I suppose. Yes, sir, in the back, standing up.
Yeah, you said that a big portion of the pushback, I guess, from the wolf reintroduction is because people know this mythical wolf, that it's they know all these rumors about it, and
Yes, sir.
for whatever reason. And then I just curious. I assume there's not any facts on it or whatnot, but why do you think the people in the the 40s, the 50s, the 60s that were dealing with it face to face, not this mythical wolf? Why do you think that they went to such extravagant efforts to eradicate it?
I think even further back into the 1900s, the war on the wolf was largely over by the 40s and the 50s. There wasn't much left, just a handful of animals in the Superior National Forest. They were all driven by this notion that if a few wolves is good, no wolves is better. And they had the federal government at their back and using good taxpayer dollars to eliminate predators. We still do that. Wildlife Services pushes hard on coyote populations, for example. And I think they just concluded that if a few is good, none is better. The data back then would have been no different. Now, here's where we did see a difference in terms of wolves and livestock. In the Southwest, you go back in the day, 100 years, let's say, 150 years, there were not many Mexican wolves in that country, southern Arizona and southern New Mexico, because it's a tough country to make a living. They did not become common in that country until there were cattle. And they were living on cattle, but they were also uncommon. They were defined by small packs that used large areas, and they were gotten rid of. And be mindful that the real friction with gray wolves arose after we got rid of most of the big game. Again, Aldo Leopold, who was the father of wildlife management, he observed many years ago that the science of wildlife management grew out of a need for things to shoot. Deer populations had been decimated, antelope populations decimated, moose populations decimated, elk populations decimated. The elk that you enjoy in the Rocky Mountain West, you know where they came from. Reintroduced from Yellowstone National Park. Thank you very much. So, and these ungulate populations are a great restoration success story. But if you pull them out of the picture, the gray wolf is still looking to put 5 to 7 pounds of food in her stomach every day. And that's what got the cattleman's ire up. And there have been conflicts, and the wolf lost over the course of a long war that lasted hundreds of years. Yes, sir, right here.
I live in Minnesota and have been very involved with gray wolf issues for the last 30 years. A force on the political and social scene in Minnesota has been the Native American tribes.
Sure.
They have really weighed in to keep the animal at a healthy population. What have the native populations in western Colorado, where do they weigh in?
I haven't spoken to any tribal representatives. I don't rightly know. I know in the northern Rocky Mountains the tribes are largely supportive. The Nez Perce tribe, for example, was critically important for the successful restoration of gray wolves to central Idaho. There is some support in the Southwest by tribes and some opposition by tribes. They are a sovereign nation, and so they have a lot of authority, and they can help or they can say no, and it's their right to choose one or the other. Yes, right here. Yes, ma'am.
Rick Knight is a professor at CSU. He just retired after 30 years. Prior to that, he worked, before he became an academic, he worked for the Washington Department of Game and the Non-Game Wildlife. He is a big supporter of ranches. He has come up with some statistics here. It was found that private ranch lands maintain 21% of the lands with an immediate connection to federal lands through grazing leases. Of the private lands surrounding public lands, 43% within a kilometer of federal land boundaries belong to those ranching counties with grazing permits. If we lose those from different pressures that we have on those, what is your answer to that? That's the one prong. The second prong, my question is, we are in a different environment here. We have lived in Montana. I work for the Montana Department of Ag, but I'm a fifth generation Western Colorado native dating back to the 1860s. We've seen the population changes. I looked at the statistics on our wilderness areas. There's a big difference in the population. Within Montana, there are 7 cities that are over 10,000 in population. The west slope of Colorado, just doing a quick count today, there's 10 cities over the population of 10,000. You can go, it's going by air as the crow flies. It's only 24 miles from Aspen to Crested Butte. It's only like 104 from Carbondale to Telluride as the crow flies. Within those areas, the biggest wilderness we have is in the Minucci wilderness of 488,000 acres. You look at, we lived on a ranch that my husband managed that was half as big as that. It was bigger than some of the wilderness in Colorado. French Church Wilderness is 2.4 million acres. Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, 1.34 million acres. Greater Yellowstone, 2.2 million acres. Bob Marshall, the total of the greater complex is 1.5 million acres. Absaroka Beartooth in Montana, Wyoming, 943,000 acres. You go on and on here. Bridger, Wyoming, 428,000. They have more space with less population. I think this is setting up an unfair deal for both the woods and the ranchers and recreation because we have a concentrated population, we have less wilderness space. We have ranchers that depend on those grazing permits and live within that area. And if we subdivide, and Rick Knight talks about that, if we subdivide those areas, then where's the wildlife habitat for all these wildlife that we
Thank you.
Summarize that.
Yeah, no, that was a wonderful question. How will what can be celebrated about Western Colorado persist if gray wolves are present? Because the nexus between private land and public land is so very important. And it's a beautiful question. I know Rick. He's a friend. He does beautiful work. I acknowledge the wonderful contributions that the ranching community makes. I understand those data. But I also know that Western Colorado is not too humanized for gray wolves. Western Colorado, populated by gray wolves, would not put an end to ranching as you know it. We've got lots of solutions to the rare problems that would arise. When you look around the world, there's any number of places that are far more humanized than Western Colorado that support gray wolves quite nicely. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, for example. There's gray wolves in Italy, for example. There's gray wolves in Spain, for example. Western Colorado is defined by wonderfully wild tracts of federal public land. You made reference to wilderness areas. They're important. But the gray wolf doesn't need a wilderness area. The gray wolf just needs to not be killed. So National Forest Service lands, BLM lands, they work quite well as public lands. State conservation lands work quite well too. So I appreciate your concern. I understand it, and I appreciate Rick's work. I just don't see that future from the data that I have access to about what wolves have meant elsewhere.
Well, if you look at the population of Colorado at 5 million versus Montana's population, you have that
Sure.
pressure on there too. I just
But then there's more people in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. We can talk more. Well, there's more beef produced in Minnesota, Wisconsin. They've got important ranches there too. I mean, they got a lot of livestock. So anyway, but we're going to keep any other questions. I don't want to go back. Yes, sir, over here.
Yeah, big picture kind of question. Let's say there were a few 100,000 wolves in America before the depopulation.
Which is true.
Yeah, I just looked at it. I'm not.
Yeah, they were common.
So if that's the cog, right? To what extent is a couple of hundred, maybe even 1,000? I mean, how is that more than PR for nature documentaries? And I mean, is it really a repopulation that's significant and meaningful?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. So you're wondering about scale. I want to go back to one slide, and I'm going quickly, and I don't mean to make everybody dizzy, but it does matter because it's a great question. We're going to go back to the very second slide if I can get there. This pattern matters, and it is not an insignificant project that is being considered, and the topic is noteworthy. You are talking about reconnecting gray wolves from the high Arctic to the Mexican border. If you get gray wolves in Colorado moving north and a few moving south, they're going to interact, and similarly some gray wolves moving from Colorado south into New Mexico and some of those Mexican wolves moving north. You'll have reestablished a genetic connection, a metapopulation, a population of wolves, a population of wolves from the high Arctic to the Mexican border. That's not inconsequential. That may not be nearly what was once there, but it still represents the most significant large carnivore restoration project in the world. And you know what it speaks to? It speaks to what I concluded, and that is the world is increasingly being humanized. Opportunities for large carnivores is growing very scarce. There's an important letter that went out. It was signed by about 13,000 scientists, including myself, written by some colleagues at Oregon State University. It's entitled A Warning to Humanity, and it aims to present a few easily understood metrics about how far off of kilter we are with our relationship with Mother Earth. One of those metrics that they provided, that they think is a harbinger of a less than glorious future, a lack of large carnivores. So you may be right. Maybe we can't do much. You're never going to have gray wolves back in Illinois. The pattern of land ownership does not support it. But you do what you can do. Yes, somebody hasn't, you, right there, yes. Yeah, with a hat on, the lady, yeah.
timeline for the reintroduction of the wolves?
Oh, gee whiz. There is no plan in place. The Rocky Mountain Wolf Project doesn't have any authority other than our determination to speak truthfully about what the science says about gray wolves and restoration options of relevance to Colorado. It would take a significant federal effort to build out a reintroduction program, or a significant state effort to build out a significant reintroduction program. So if again, you can use the Northern Rockies as an example. You all know that there were decades of spade work done to soften the landscape that made it possible to reintroduce gray wolves into Yellowstone National Park. Decades of spade work. In some respects, this evening is all about spade work. Yeah, a couple more, then I think we're probably out of time, yeah? Right here, yes, go ahead.
There's a photo behind you of the
Moose.
recently reintroduced. We were all here to talk, and they brought a population in Utah. And I was just wondering if you could talk about, because we just had an introduction of another big ungulate.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of ungulate pressure on this land, and how does having the wolf even present just psychologically change?
Well, once again, if you're looking for ecological effects from gray wolves, it's all about density and persistence. One gray wolf in western Colorado for one day doesn't make a whit of difference. One gray wolf in Yellowstone Park for one day doesn't make any difference. But if there's enough gray wolves in place for a long enough period of time, they're going to kill enough stuff to make a difference. There are parts of Yellowstone that are different today because gray wolves and the other carnivores have been common enough for a long enough period of time to make a difference. Trophic cascades don't come about easily. Don't be misled by everyone saying, oh, holy mackerel, it's going to change the ecological fabric of western Colorado. It has that potential if gray wolves are calm enough for a long enough period of time. But it doesn't just happen automatically. What gray wolves can do right out of the gate is begin to promote more health in your herds. You all know that chronic wasting disease is a problem in your state, right? Both for deer and elk. You all know that it is a wasting disease, and it can take a long time to manifest itself. And you all know that the Center for Disease Control says, oh, gee whiz, you ought not eat meat from an animal that's diseased with chronic wasting disease. Well, the problem is you don't know. You don't know. You may kill that deer and you think, oh, that was a great hunt, and I've got a freezer full of venison. But that animal may be diseased and you don't know it. You're going to eat that deer? So if you're a gray wolf, you're a coursing predator. Your whole job is about sifting the herd, looking for some small advantage. You know, they've studied wolves and moose in Isle Royale National Park every year since 1958, the longest-standing ecological study of predators and prey in the world, wolves and moose. And for all those years, all the interactions they've seen, every time the moose simply stands its ground, the gray wolves give up. If they don't see some small advantage, they give up. They're very good at finding advantage, very good at sifting the herd looking for some advantage. So I could see right away wolf predation could begin to serve as a governor on the spread of chronic wasting disease. That ought to be something that's of interest to Coloradans.
Let's do one more question. If you've got further questions, Mike, you'll hang out for a few minutes.
Sure. Right here. Last one. Yes, sir.
I have a question regarding your numbers. Actually, the newspaper yesterday, I think, corrected one of your figures. You had an average, and they said that last year there were about 39,000 elk killed in Colorado. And your numbers say that we could expect about 10,000 killed by wolves. And I'm pretty much all in support of the whole program. I wonder how CPW would then have to adjust tags. I mean, they're managing not for 272,000, they're managing for that 39,000. And if that's 25% of the wolf population, or 25% of the elk kill, of the elk hunter kill is now the wolf. Is that tantamount to a 25% decrease in license sales, and therefore a significant decrease in the funding of CPW?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Thank you. And I've got data that we can look at that show elk harvest in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho over a 20-year period of time rather than averages. Those are the data I presented for Colorado. Right. Those data come from CPW from 2004 to 2015. And so on average, from those data, 48,000 elk would be killed on average. Now, y'all understand average is not necessarily a very good metric. If I was really being detailed, I would show you the spread around that 48.5. And if it's a big spread, that would say that that's not necessarily what's likely going to happen in every one average year.
But 25%
Yeah. I would argue that with such a robust population in the first place, and that 275 is after hunter take, that you're probably not looking at a reduction in licensed sales. We certainly have not seen that in the northern Rocky Mountains. What we have seen is about $320,000 being collected on average by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks through the sale of wolf permits. Now, it's $1 million program, so the other 2/3 has got to come from other sources, and those are other sportsmen and sportswomen dollars. But people are willing to pay money to buy a wolf license. I don't anticipate the CPW would be reducing elk tags because of a viable population of gray wolves in western Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and Mike will stick around for a few more questions.